You should be very familiar with the unit circle, and in fact, you should be able to label the degree and radian measures and all of the x and y values for each point on the unit circle in about 5 minutes. So in this video, we want to look at how we might go about doing that. Let's start in Quadrant 1, and let's label the degree measures first. So starting at 0 degrees, and here we have a measure of 30 degrees. So from here to here, 30 degrees. Here we have 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and then 90 degrees. 0 degrees is the same thing as 0 radians, so let's go ahead and label the radians. 30 degrees is pi divided by, now remember that pi is the same thing as 180. 180 divided by what would give us 30 degrees? Well, that would be 6. So that's pi over 6. 180 divided by 4 would give us 45 degrees. So this is pi over 4 in radians. 60 degrees would be pi 180 divided by 3. So that is pi over 3 radians. For 90 degrees, we would have pi, or 180 degrees divided by 2. So 90 degrees is the same as pi over 2 in radians. Now we would like to label the points for each of these angle measures. So for 0 degrees and for 0 radians, the point that lives on the unit circle here, remember that the radius is 1, so the x distance would be 1, the y value would be 0. The sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. On our unit circle, the cosine value of the angle comes first, and the sine value of the angle comes next. So if the sine value is 1/2, the cosine value would be square root of 3 over 2. For all of the 45 degree angles, or the pi over 4 family of angles, the sine and cosine value are exactly the same, square root of 2 over 2. For 60 degrees, it is exactly the opposite of 30 degrees. So the cosine value would be 1/2, the sine value would be square root of 3 over 2. Now notice that all the points that I'm labeling here are all positive. Remember that in Quadrant 1, all of the sine and cosine values are positive. So all are positive here. This point goes straight up from the origin, and that is a y distance of 1, and that is an x distance of 0. Now we want to label all of the values in Quadrant 2. Label the degree measures first. Measure would be 120 degrees, 135 degrees, and then 150 degrees. When we talk about labeling in radians, let's go back to Quadrant 1. 60 degrees and pi over 3 radians are the same thing. 60, if I multiply that by 2, I get 120. So if I take pi over 3 and I multiply that by 2, I get 2 pi over 3. So 45 degrees, if I multiply that by 3, I get 135. So if I take pi over 4 and I multiply that by 3, I get 3 pi over 4. For 30 degrees, if I multiply that by 5, I get 150 degrees. So if I take pi over 6 and I multiply that by 5, we get 5 pi over 6. Here, we know that halfway around the circle, we have 180 degrees, and we know that pi in radians is equivalent to 180 degrees. Now we would like to label the points. In Quadrant 2, we know that x is negative and y is positive. So we want to label the points. We know that all of the points will have a negative x value and a positive y value. Now we will use the work that we have already done in Quadrant 1. If we take this point here for 60 degrees and we reflect it across the y-axis, the value here would be negative 1/2 and positive square root of 3 over 2. The 45 degree angle family will have the same numeric value as 45 degrees, except we know that the first one will be negative, the second coordinate will be positive. When we look at 30 degrees, 150 degree angle will have exactly the same x and y value, except for the x value will be negative because we are in Quadrant 2. 180 degrees, or pi radians, this value will be a negative 1, and this will be 0. So if we know the points in Quadrant 1, then we can reflect those and keep the same points but just change the signs based upon the quadrant. In quadrant 3, we have 30-degree reference angle from 180 into quadrant 3, so that would be 180 plus 30 degrees, so that would be 210. The next value would be 225, 240 degrees, 270 degrees. Now let's label the radian values. 210 has a reference angle of 30 degrees, so we know it's the pi over 6 family. Now 30 degrees times 7 would be 210. So this is 7 times pi over 6. If we take 45 degrees and multiply that by 5, we get 225. So 5 pi over 4 would be 225. 240 degrees, that would be 60 degrees times 4. So we'll take the radian measure, pi over 3, and multiply that by 4. So that would be 4 pi over 3. Now let's label the points. So we talked about that reference angles have exactly the same sine and cosine values, except changing the signs based upon the quadrant. So in quadrant 3, we know that x is negative and y is negative. So all of the values for each of these points will be negative. So 150 degrees and 210 both have the same reference angle of 30 degrees. So that must mean the cosine value would be the same for both of these angles, except changing the sign based upon the quadrant. If square root of 3 over 2, then it will be the same for 210. The sine value of 150 was a positive 1/2. So the sine value of 210 will be negative 1/2. So we're taking these values and just reflecting them across the y-axis. So we're using the idea that reference angles can help us to determine the point values on the unit circle. All of the values that have a reference angle of 60 degrees, if we look at 60 degrees, 120 degrees, and also 240 degrees, we notice that all of those points look exactly the same, except for the sign changes based upon the quadrant. What about 270 degrees? What is the radian measure for that? Well, go back to 90 degrees. 90 degrees times 3 would give you 270. 3 times pi over 2 then would give us our radian measure. And the point here goes straight down from the origin in the negative y direction, so the x value would be 0, the y value would be negative 1. In quadrant 4, we have 270, we're going to add 30 degrees to that, we get 300, and then 315 degrees, and then 330 degrees. So working with our reference angles, 330 degrees has a reference angle of 30 degrees. So it's going to be our pi over 6 family. So if I go from 30 to 330, I multiply by 11. So pi over 6 times 11, or 11 pi over 6, would be the radian measure for 330 degrees. Let's go to 300. 300 degrees, that is a reference angle of 60 degrees. 60 times 5 will get us to 300 degrees. So pi over 3 times 5 will give us the radian measure. For 315 degrees, 45 times 7 would be 315. So 7 times pi over 4 would be the radian measure. Lastly, let's look at going all the way around the circle. We'll get back to the 0 degree mark. That's the same thing as 360 degrees. And we know that 360 is 180 times 2, or pi times 2 would be the radian measure. So we already have that point labeled 1, 0. For quadrant 4, we know that the x value is positive and the y value is negative. We can also do a reflection here. The reference angles tell us which points we're going to use. So 30 degrees and 330 have the same reference angle of 30 degrees. So the numeric values will be the same. The pi over 4 family has square root of 2 over 2 for both values. The pi over 3 family, or the 60 degree reference angle family, has a first coordinate of 1/2 and a second coordinate of square root of 3 over 2.